From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
After spending his first 4 terms in the minority, Massachusetts Congressman Bill Keating is experiencing life as a member of the majority party for the first time. He's used his newfound power to hold hearings on President Trump's foreign policy, a hot topic this week after the sudden departure of National Security Advisor John Bolton. Keating has also been focused on local issues affecting New Bedford, Fall River, and other communities in the 9th District, including the stalled Vineyard Wind Project and the Mashpee-Wampanoag's long-running battle to build a tribal casino. This week on Newsmakers, the latest from Capitol Hill with Democratic Congressman Bill Keating. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Congressman Bill Keating, welcome to the program. It's good to have you.
It's great to be here. It's a wonderful day.
It is.
Here, and we're enjoying, being away from Capitol Hill at least for a day.
I'm sure you are.
A few hours, yeah.
So for people at home to get a sense of your district before we dive in, your district covers south of Boston, Rockland, Norwell, then it goes down out through Cape Cod, and then continues down through southeastern Massachusetts, New Bedford, and into a big geographical chunk of Fall River.
Yeah, it's really, people have told me that if you did it in a linear fashion, it's the most coastal district of any congressional district, and if you think of it, it's basically the South Shore, the South Coast,
right,
Cape and the islands. So
yeah, just follow the water almost.
You just can follow the water.
A lot of beaches in your district, but as I said, a big chunk of Fall River is in your district, and we have to start there because it's been a big week of news out of there, been a big year of news out of there, really. The Mayor Jazel Correa last week arrested again on a superseding indictment, this time alleging bribery and extortion. Prosecutors say he put his office up for sale. Mayor Correa has maintained his innocence, and in fact, he's on the ballot for a preliminary election on Tuesday. Some have called for him to resign, but he certainly has his supporters. Where do you stand?
Well, Tim, it's interesting the perspective I bring. I mean, not just representing Fall River, but I was a district attorney for 12 years before I ran for Congress, and I understand the system well enough to know that when you're in a litigation like this, if you're indicted in a criminal sense like this, it's so time consuming. It takes all your energy, it changes your ability to function no matter what your job is. And the first time the indictments came down, I was public in saying I think it's for the best interest of Fall River that the mayor resign. And certainly now that this has happened again, I believe the same thing. For the best interest of Fall River, you cannot really effectively run a city and the demands of that and then maintain what you're facing. And plus, if you're looking at the best interest of the city, even though a person is innocent, and that's our system, I was a minister of justice as a DA, not just a prosecutor, the way I view the job. You're innocent until you're proven guilty. However, that is going to inhibit your ability to function in that capacity too. So if you're going to put the city above yourself, you should resign.
Others will argue, though, hey, look, that's up to the voters. And there was a recall election after his first indictment. And while it was a narrow victory, 35%, I believe he won with, he was put back into office after the first indictment. So why shouldn't voters make the call here?
Well, certainly after that occurred, none of this has hindered at all the way I view my work with Fall River, work with the mayor's office. In fact, it makes you want to do more. So that the city's in the best shape it can be. But the answer to that question, it happened again, even subsequent to that. So I think that it throws it back to where it was before.
We have a lot we want to cover, but one other question, kind of going to that point, Congressman. Does it harm the city? One of the jobs of a congressman is to advocate when a city in your district wants a grant or is looking to get the feds to build something. Does it come up in a meeting with the Department of Transportation or some other department when they say, well, where are we going to be sending that money if we give you that grant, Congressman?
I don't think it would with the grants per se, but I think it might when you have businesses or other entities trying to do business with the city or trying to decide whether or not to move at a certain time, or whether to wait it out. Those kind of things have its effect. And unfortunately, this is not a helpful thing for the city. The city is moving in a great direction and will continue to do that, I believe. But this is a setback, and it's something that I think if you really put your own interest to the side and thought of the city, you should resign. I honestly think I'm not going to ever tell anyone what to do, but if I were a defense attorney advising the mayor under those circumstances, I would want the mayor to be best prepared for the case and to concentrate all the attention on it, but that's not my position at all, and that's his own personal decision.
Let's shift gears. You've come around to support impeachment proceedings against President Donald Trump. What brought you there?
Well, I've moved to have an impeachment investigation. And
the nomenclature has become a little confusing for everyone.
I'm glad you said that. Because it isn't that simple as you look at each member of Congress. But clearly there is a line where you want to be public about the fact that this is the action that's taken. Indeed, just this week, the Judiciary Committee in the House decided to do that and voted to do that. And one of the reasons they decided to do it is because they're getting stonewalled. Again, just a little bit of my background looking at what's happening. The Congress has a right to information. They have the right to oversight constitutionally and to investigate. And there's more at stake than just President Donald Trump's administration and President Donald Trump right now. The kind of questions that are being thrust on us have ramifications no matter who the president will be down the road. We're seeing things we never anticipated. We're seeing things happen that the framers of the Constitution and the people thereafter never thought would happen. They never thought they'd see such movement with self-enrichment as blatantly as it's occurring now with the violation, I believe, of the Emoluments Clause. They never, I don't think, saw quite the cloud over whether someone's compromised because of activities and business dealings with Russia, a foreign entity. These are all issues that should be decided, not just in terms of Donald Trump, but in terms of future presidents. And if we don't act and get answers, if we allow a president to stall and stonewall and fight subpoenas and order people that Congress has summoned to testify, ordered them not to do it, the precedent is set for everyone after that. So there's really more than just the issue of Donald Trump at stake here. They're very important issues down the road. So my decision is, let's move forward and not allow any president ever to do what he's doing currently to Congress. And so one of the tools we're giving is by moving for the impeachment investigation, we're making ourselves more able to get that information that honestly should just have been given.
I want to ask you, speaking of President Trump, about John Bolton. You are very active on foreign affairs. You're a subcommittee chair on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Most Democrats don't agree with John Bolton's quite hawkish views on foreign policy. So,
a lot of Republicans don't agree.
Yeah, this is including the president, apparently. Were you happy on some level, even though it came out in a strange way with Twitter to some extent? Were you happy to see Bolton out?
The president has no foreign policy. I mean, I sit in Foreign Affairs. I'm on the Middle East Subcommittee. I chair the European and Eurasia Subcommittee. I've been there my whole time in Congress. There's never been an administration in recent times that has no policy. There are no policies. So when you're looking at conflicts of policy with the president, check your watch or check the Twitter feeds. I mean, this is how quickly things shift. And so when the president selected Bolton, it was a collision course. It was not going to end.
So you're not surprised?
I'm not surprised at all. And you just look at the conflicts, the major conflicts that he's had. I mean, in North Korea, he did not favor going along the lines the president did with these negotiations. It's still not checking his Kim Jong-un's progress with missiles and moving on his nuclear program. Look at Afghanistan, where the president was negotiating with the Taliban. Bolton didn't agree with that. In Iran, President Trump's talking about meeting with Rouhani, and Bolton's saying, no, we can't do that. So again, you could go country to country. In Venezuela, he was the hard pusher.
As a Democrat, though, so talking to Iran, President Obama wanted that. So in some ways, it seems like the president's foreign policy instincts.
There is no policy. That's the issue. It really is. And we have witness after witness, including former members of the Bush administration, testify in front of our committee that the problem is there's no policy. There's no predictability. if you're involved in foreign policy, it should be something that's predictable, something that there's resolve with, something that is organic. It comes from the floor up, not from the top, changes mind from time to time. We never should have engaged in talks with North Korea without the predicate of setting the stage. This is what we want if we're going to have negotiations. We want to know what you have for nuclear materials. We want to know where the bases are. We want to know what you're doing in terms of delivery of that. All that has to be transparent, and then we'll have a discussion. That wasn't done, and they wanted, on the other hand, the sanctions reduced or eliminated, and they wanted, Kim Jong-un in particular, wanted to raise his own profile as a international leader. We gave up all of that without getting what was necessary. And so I could see where Bolton has problems with that, and I can see where the traditional way of dealing with foreign policy wouldn't agree with that process at all. So if you actually, it's kind of interesting. You could disagree, as I have, with Bolton's philosophy and his wildly hawkish attitude, but he's coming to that job at least using the same kind of history, tradition that has to be addressed in terms of policy, and he ran up against a president who has no policy, who doesn't believe in setting the stage, and who, Venezuela is a great example, was right behind Bolton. We're with you, you're in the right course, and then when things went south, he just abandoned them.
All right, we're going to go to a break in a couple of minutes. I do want to just pivot back to impeachment for a moment, because we had Congressman Jim Langevin on the program a couple of weeks ago. And while we were talking to him about that, he admitted or acknowledged that pursuing an impeachment investigation, as you call it, against President Trump could be actually a boon to the president, could help his reelection, and could be a dumb political idea for the Democrats. Is he right?
Well, I was disappointed in the Mueller report, not in Director Mullen, who's done so much militarily and service to the country, but the report was so narrow. It was simply conspiracy, which is very hard to prove, and it's harder to prove when the person or the entities you're conspiring with are Russian. They're international, and if there's any sources of information, they're either going to end up being dead, in jail, or missing. And he wasn't able to prove that. No surprise there, but that's the way he narrowed it down.
Congressman, the political fallout here is my question.
Well, this is where I'm getting to.
Okay, let's get there, please.
All right. Well, these things aren't simple, but the issue is we have to do more. The Mueller report didn't deal with criminal fraud. The Mueller report didn't deal with potential money laundering. The Mueller report didn't deal with self-enrichment in violation of the Emoluments Clause. All these issues, if we have a compromised president, or all these violations, didn't deal with the violations of election fraud that are there. Now, he referred out 12 cases. We don't know what they are even. So maybe he did. But we have to find out. That the review of what was being done was so narrow that this impeachment investigation is necessary to look at the broad issues that no one else other than Congress is going to look at. So that's where my strong feelings are on this, and that's why we have to do it. We shouldn't be gauging ahead, making a political determination if he's going to probably, if it goes to the Senate, be exonerated, if you will. That's what he'll call it.
But within 30 seconds, do you acknowledge, as Congressman Langevin does, that in some areas of the country, particularly, it could be damaging to your party?
We shouldn't look at the political side of this. We should be looking at getting to the facts, and that's where I'm coming from. I really think we're following the same game that perhaps he is doing, putting politics first. I believe we have to do this to get the information. If that information reveals things that should be revealed, then we'll be in a different position. But we shouldn't back away from that responsibility because of political reasons.
We're going to take a break on the program. When we come back, there was another debate for the Democratic candidates for president. Who is Congressman Bill Keating watching for president? Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, eyewitness news reporter Ted Nesi, and our guest this week is Congressman Bill Keating. He represents Massachusetts' 9th District. Congressman, we want to dive into politics. Congressman Joe Kennedy is considering a primary challenge to Senator Ed Markey. Who would you support in that scenario?
Well, you know, Senator Markey had called me earlier, as he did call many government officials in Massachusetts, and said, you know, can I have your support? And I said, sure, because we had no idea that Joe Kennedy was going to run at the time. So certainly that's not going to change. But I work with both of them. It's very difficult, and they both have enormous strength and abilities. And we'll just see what happens. I mean, nothing has happened officially yet.
Right.
Yet it does appear to be in a course where Joe's going to run.
Were you surprised when you heard this?
Not terribly. I mean, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. I know, serving with Joe, that he's all over the country helping other members of Congress campaigning. His schedule is really taxing on him, and he's got a young family. If this can bring some order to that, I think that's one of the considerations that maybe political pundits wouldn't be looking at. But if you're working with someone, you get to know them, you know their personal life, you know that this is something to be more attractive on the personal level, then you understand it better.
Have you talked to Joe Kennedy about this specifically?
I had conversations that were within other conversations. He didn't call me, I didn't call him up about what are you doing. But as we're talking about other issues that we work on together, and certainly we share Fall River together, you know, conversation comes up around the periphery, but I allow people to make their own decisions. It's not an easy one to make for anyone, but I understand where he's coming from. I understand where Ed Markey's coming from.
You said this is difficult. I mean, are you worried about the way this would almost inevitably divide the Massachusetts Democratic Party over the next year if Kennedy gets in? I mean, he's already up over double digits, but Markey's the incumbent.
Yeah, you know, I've learned something over the years. Don't worry about what you can't control. And so I have no control over what either one of them might do. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I'll work and do my job the best way I can. I'll work with them. They both are extraordinarily talented people and have a great deal of experience and ability. So I guess if you look at it that way, it could be looked at as a pleasant problem. It's not like you have alternatives that are terrible.
So you're not advising Joe Kennedy not to do
I'm
this.
Not advising anyone
Anyway. If Senator Warren's seat became vacant, is that something you would consider?
For yourself?
For yourself.
You know, right now, the way my mind is set up, we're in a historical time. And that's no exaggeration. I think it's a matter of fact. And sometimes the times find us. And I happen to be fortunate to be a member of Congress. I'm on a committee where right now a lot of the decisions of the Trump administration are really putting our country in jeopardy in a security sense, in an economic sense. The Russians and Chinese are threats to us, but they don't have one thing we do. We have this historic coalition of the West. It's being pulled apart by this administration and by Russia and by China. And my focus is take my particular role of responsibility as a member of Congress in the whole and do that. And meanwhile, in this region, we're dealing with issues, critical issues for our future, like vineyard wind, the blue economy, which from the moment I was in office, I had this vision of southeastern Massachusetts and the Cape being the hub, not just in our region, but nationally and internationally, of blue economy, the ocean economy, which is going to be the fastest growing in the future. We have infrastructure issues. We have the 2 bridges in the Cape. There's so many things I'm involved in right now that as I view my role, I would like to get to a point where I take it to the next step and do that. And maybe you can in another office, but my mind is focused on those issues and making a real contribution while I have the privilege to be in office.
At the very least, it sounds like you're running again in 2020.
Yes.
Okay. You just want to check that box off while we're on the program.
You turned 67 last week. Happy birthday.
Thank you so
actually
much.
Fairly young for Congress these days.
Well, yeah. If you look around.
How long do you see yourself staying
You
in
know,
Congress?
for the past few years, frankly, I've done it 2 years to 2 years. You know, you have to do enough to make sure you don't make any last-minute decisions. That's why I've already made this decision, because you have to be dealing with this now. You have to be going forward and dealing with it. There's issues coming up that are critical issues. So when I get to the point where I don't love the job as much as I should, I'll leave. I've always, whether it was in the legislature or as a DA and here, I've always had this attitude that when I leave and decide to leave, I want to still love the job. I'll make the decision sort of against what I really love doing. That way you're leaving it strong. The one thing I could never, frankly, it bothered me a great deal with colleagues along the line sometimes. People sit there and they're in these positions, whether it's state legislature, and you'll hear them privately, and all they'll do is complain, complain. And I would sit there and say, then get out. There's a lot of other people that want to have that job. We're not all doing you a favor.
Well, let's wrap up the political conversation before I do want to ask you about Vineyard Wind. But we taped this on a Friday.
Right.
There was a debate last night. I don't know if you watched it, but
I watched a lot of it.
You did. Okay. Are you backing Senator Warren for president?
I'm not backing anyone right now. I let the process go. People had said it's unfortunate there were initially over 20 candidates going. I didn't think it was the worst thing in the world. I think what happened last time in the last election, there was a real strong party effort. No surprise there, to get behind one candidate and actually this is the best way to deal with it. It didn't turn out to be the best way. I think this is a great opportunity for people to come and see how it shifts. Have someone earn it, step forward, and deal with it. And that's a process that's going on now. It can get very difficult sometimes. Sometimes with the Democratic Party, you're throwing little barbs at each other, and I don't like to see that happen. But at the end of the day, I think we'll have a stronger candidate.
We're running low on time, but we want to hit up the Tribe and Vineyard Wind. So I'm going to ask about the Mashpee Wampanoag bill, which you've been a strong supporter of. You got that through the House. You've been critical of Rhode Island leaders for fighting that bill. But on some level, can you really blame them when they're looking at $400 million of their revenue at risk from gambling if a tribal casino goes over the line?
Well, my interest in the bill is the fact that not as much on gaming, and unfortunately that's part of it. It's attached to it. You can't ignore it. But the issue that I had was the tribe itself. This is the tribe of the first Thanksgiving. It's there. The decisions of the Supreme Court were wrong. How you could ignore the tribe that was there with the Pilgrims and say they're not a tribe is something that I just never could conceive. The Obama administration in 2015 recognized them. Trump came in, his administration in 2018 pulled that back. These are programs that deal with education, social services, business decisions, fighting the heroin and opioid problems rather they have in their tribe that are multiple times more than the norm. All those things are at stake for the tribe. So that's where I was coming from with this. Now, the gaming got involved and it was part of the issue. The one thing I really couldn't understand from the Rhode Island perspective is Massachusetts has made a decision. They're going to have in that sector, in the southern sector, they're going to have a gaming operation. That's going to happen. So it could be some other enterprise or it could be this tribe. To me, fighting it, maybe you gain a year or two of delay, but somewhere down the line, there's going to be a gaming operation right there.
We have less than 2 minutes left, so I do want to hit this up. Vineyard Wind, it's this 84 turbine project plan for south of Martha's Vineyard. Hit a major snag when the EPA held off on issuing an environmental impact study. Is it dead in the water?
No, it isn't, but this was a setback. There was a sort of an agreement that they would make this environmental impact permit in the early summer. That was delayed to the late summer. They changed in April with a new secretary who came as a lobbyist from the oil and gas industry. The assistant secretary, who I was dealing with a lot, just left to go for an oil company, an oil drilling company. All of a sudden things changed. However, we're working hard to go forward. There's still a window which we can operate. Most people recognize the fact that qualifying for the tax credits, if you start the effort, which they did do with all the testing and everything else, that would likely be considered tolling that time, so that there's still the time for the tax credits to go into effect. They haven't lost any of their capitalization. They're moving forward. In fact, they bid on the second stage of this. So it's alive, but the next if there's a next delay, it's going to be something that's even more damaging to them. Now, all the New England states are getting together. You've got Maine, you have New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and I hear Rhode Island is going to sign on to a letter to the Secretary asking them, please go forward with this.
We have 15 seconds left.
It's a regional issue. It's a huge economic issue. It's an environmental issue. It should happen. I hope it still does.
Congressman Bill Keating, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thanks,
if you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com, and don't forget to sign up for our podcast through iTunes. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.